Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Ron Jacobs, a partner in the nonprofit organizations practice here. Jeff is unable to make it today, so I will be filling in on the moderator duties. Thank you all very much for coming today. We've got a number of venerable attorneys from throughout our nonprofits organization practice and others who work with our nonprofits. I just ask them to all kind of wave their hands real quick just to kind of say hello so you can see where they're all hiding in the back there. Disperse. You're supposed to be seeing everybody and talking. But thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to talk about performance management and getting the best out of your nonprofit's workforce. So as a reminder, there is CAE credit available for those of you in attendance here today. We have a couple of upcoming events. There we go. So we've got CAE credit covered. We have a few upcoming events as well to there we go. Upcoming events.
I'll get it in a minute.
They'll eventually get here.
Thank you, Vanna.
So we have privacy and data security coming up in January. And then in February, nonprofit mergers, alliances, and joint ventures. And in March, a very timely topic with everything in the news these days, harassment, what your nonprofit should be doing to keep itself out of the headlines. That's always an important thing to do. So today we're going to talk about performance management. And I think in many ways, this is one of the least legal of our presentations that we've done. There's a lot of practical how-to develop your workforce, motivate employees, looking at employees and the performance holistically, not necessarily just the annual review time. So a little less legal, a little more day-to-day HR practical for you. So I hope it's helpful and works well and gets you to thinking about your organization's performance management system. So our speakers today are Marcia Moulton. She is the former EVP of HR at ACDI VOCA. She's over 25 years of experience leading HR in the for-profit and nonprofit world, so a lot of great experience. And she literally wrote the book on performance management, or at least one of the books. I guess there are a lot of them, but we like hers. Throw Out the Ratings is the name of the book, and she's working on another one. Marcia has received numerous awards and is a frequent speaker on the topic. Megan Mann is a counsel here at Venable in our labor and employment practice. She focuses on employment law and provides a lot of training and substantive advice to our clients, a lot of counseling on everything from hiring to firing and kind of everything in between in the lifespan of an employee. Policies, employment policies and handbooks and training. Megan's widely published on a lot of different topics. So unlike most of our events where we do questions throughout the event, we're going to hold the questions to the end. So for those online, you're more than welcome to submit your questions as we go, and we'll hold those to the end. In the room here, after the presentation, we'll have the microphones moving around so that you can ask your questions. But we figured this might work a little bit better for this particular presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to our speakers for today. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate it. Thank you guys all so much for coming. We have a packed house here, and then I think about 200 people online, and that's the reason why we need to hold the questions until the end, but we will absolutely stay and chat, and we invite you guys to stay and chat with us. So we are here today to talk about performance management. So one of the things that I'm going to just briefly go over our discussion topics. I think right, Marcia's got the, thank you so much. So we're going to have a little bit of coordination as Marcia controls the slides, but we're going to talk about what performance management actually is. So everybody's got a different definition, and I'm sure none of them are wrong, but we're going to go over some ideas about the concept, and that's going to include the history of performance management and what the goals of your performance management system are, or at least should be. We're also going to generate some ideas, again, and that's probably our primary goal today, is to get you guys thinking about your workforce and about how you are working with your workforce. So we want to generate some thought about how you're approaching your performance management system, and if you feel like you don't have one, how you can approach developing one. Part of that is going to be discussing the different tools or components of performance management and how you can use those within your organization. Then, of course, why are we doing this? We're doing this because we think that a solid performance management system can help you and your employees in the organization. So we're going to talk about the benefits you're going to get from going about this way of thinking and using some of these tools, and how it helps all employees, but including and especially our largest growing workforce in America today. Everybody loves to talk about The Millennials, of course, and we're no exception. We're going to dig into it. So, and then, you know, I go around the country and I talk and I do soft skills training, but I am a lawyer and they would fire me if I didn't talk about the law. So we're going to talk about how to mitigate risk. And I know everybody wants to mitigate risk. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megan. This is Marsha. We were just going over our little intro here, letting you know that we are talking about performance management. If you are here for anything else, let me know. Exit to the back. Okay, so Marsha, why don't you tell them what we think performance management is?
All right, so before we can have this hour-long discussion about performance management, we really need to have a shared working definition of what we mean by performance management, because I hear it used in a lot of different ways. For our purposes today, we think this is a good definition that we can all use. Performance management is a functional HR strategy designed to enable employees to perform at a high level so that they may achieve the organization's objectives. Does that make sense for everybody? Good. Activities include the defining of roles, onboarding, goal setting, communication, coaching and feedback, employee development, and rewards. Now, what I often hear is the term performance management interchanged with performance evaluation. And I do it myself, and I think it's a perfectly fine way to define it. But obviously, it is so much more than that. And we're going to be talking about it much more holistically than just the performance evaluation. We're going to talk about that and some tips for a good, effective system. But we all recognize that it goes way beyond that. Right, Megan?
Absolutely. So lots of different components. And again, we love the word holistic, looking at the whole employee, the whole organization. So what's the purpose of a performance management system? Okay. Now, Marsha gave you a big hint. Anyone? Okay. I know you've had your coffee this morning. We got this. We got this. Somebody is going to give me an answer of what you think the purpose of a performance management system is. And if not, I went to law school and I will implement the Socratic method. Okay, yes, thank you. Evaluation. Okay, we've got the goal is to do an evaluation. Anyone else? Reward. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yes, and if they're successful, you're successful, the organization is successful. So what is the goal? To achieve the mission of the organization, okay? We all have an organizational mission. All of you guys were right. That's the good thing about, I like to throw out questions where everybody's right and everyone's a winner. Yay. So the goal is to achieve your mission. Every organization has a mission, okay? How do we do that? We bring on the best people we can, and we're not hiring them just to discipline them and fire them, right? We want to look at the individual. How can we get the best out of each individual so that it's the best for the team, so that it's the best for the organization? That's our ultimate goal.
Right. So when we talk about performance management, we have to step back for a minute. So let's go back to the 1980s. In 1985, the Washington Post published an article that was titled "Middle Managers Under Siege." It was that time in the mid-'80s that organizations started jettisoning their management people, that middle management level that made sure all of the people were working in unison and keeping the trains running on time. There were three reasons why they did that. First of all, increased competition as a result of mergers, as a result of a trend toward decentralization, and the increased use of technology in the workplace. And so the result of that was that employees were expected to be able to do something that linked them directly to the success of the organization, directly. So not just that they would manage people who would then do work that resulted in success for the organization. And so, you know, and we could debate whether or not that was a good idea. I mean, clearly it seemed like it was, but it did have some consequences that might have been unintended. And those consequences were that the whole notion of management as a skill set stopped having favor. Because if you're an employee and you're expected to do something, and then, oh, by the way, you have to supervise these other people, but the reward systems and the measurements are geared on what your direct input to the organization was, then management responsibilities and skills are going to take a back seat. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, Marcia, if I may, when you're hiring somebody, I think you're more likely to see, of course, you're going to see their technical skills. You're going to see where they went to school and what job they had. But you're more likely to see somebody list a foreign language they're never going to use or skiing as an activity than you are, I'm a great leader and I'm great with people. People are not advertising these skills and they're not necessarily looking for them. Now, I know there are a lot of organizations that are moving to more of an EQ model for hiring. But again, this is just people focus on technical skills, not management skills.
Right. And when we make someone a supervisor, why do they become a supervisor? Because they're so good at what they do, right? Which isn't related to supervising people. And so what then, if we come back to the future, and we're now back at 2017, what we have is a situation where we have people who are reluctant managers. They are themselves concerned about making a good impression on their bosses by doing whatever technical thing that they do well. And then, oh, by the way, they have these additional responsibilities over here. They're not comfortable giving feedback to other people. They expect other people to do their job like they're doing their job. And so what has happened is that the whole piece of performance evaluations and performance management has fallen to HR, who seems to be the one who's constantly preaching, you have to do this, you have to do this, but the reward systems aren't built to back it up. And so your whole performance evaluation ends up being viewed by employees as either lame or intimidating, and everybody's unhappy with it. So that's part of how we got to where we are now. Why do we need to solve this problem now more than ever? Megan brought it up a minute ago, millennials. They're not letting us get away with it anymore. So we've got to find a way to deal with it. So we're going to talk first about performance management objectives. When I came around to the tables and I talked to people a little bit about what brought you here today, I heard a number of people say we're in the middle of our performance evaluation system right now, or we're looking at revamping it. And I think it's good to step back and again, encompassing beyond just performance evaluations, but the whole performance management objectives. What I term is the 4 R's, right? So first, we want to reach organizational goals. Obviously, critically important. If we don't do this, we won't have an organization. But at the same time, we want to realize individual growth, because no organizational goal has ever been achieved without a person, right? So we need to somehow marry that individual growth with organizational goals. We need to reinforce core values. And I think this is a really important objective because it has to go beyond the fact that we got something done. It's how we go about doing it, right? We have to be able to find a way to take our values off of that little placard in the entrance or on our website into what people are doing in their daily lives and how they're approaching their work. And obviously, we need to retain critical skills, right? We're not a university. We don't train people up and send them away, although sometimes it feels like that. So these are the 4 R's that I often refer to in terms of performance management objectives. And if whatever system you decide to have, and there are a lot you can choose from, if you go back and say, are we doing this, then you'll have a good, effective performance management system.
Right. Thanks, Marcia. So now we're going to get into myth busting. Why are we going to myth bust? Because talking about what performance management is super groovy. It's like holistic and we get the best. And well, what does that really mean? Well, it's actually easier to tell you what it's not than to tell you what it is. So first, we're going to tell you what it's not. Mythbuster, myth number one, performance management is HR's responsibility, okay? I point here. I'm never going to get used to the two screens, just so we're clear. I'm either going to look back here or I'm going to be pointing here like you're looking at my screen. I mean, I'm already the mom who like embarrasses my kids, and that's never going to change. So we'll just deal with it for the next hour. So performance management is not just HR's responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility. It takes a village, people, okay? We want to be sending the message that we are all responsible for performance management. We want individual employees to be taking stock of what is going on in their own careers, what they could be doing better in the future, what their goals are. We want their supervisors and managers at the next level to be understanding that it is their responsibility to be engaging the team and enhancing performance. And that goes up and up and up and up, even though one of my favorite things to promote is a horizontal approach to leadership. Still, nevertheless, you know, we do often have a hierarchical system. I just can't today. So we have that system, and it's everyone's responsibility, including the individual. So it takes a village. We do want to involve HR, and we want to be strategic, but it's everyone's responsibility. Next myth is that performance management is a once-a-year process. Okay, so I hear that, you know, I hear this all the time. No offense, sorry, not to pick on my colleague, but people will say performance management is the annual review. Well, that's a component. That's a tool, but when we are dealing with employees, they are people. We are all people. And personnel relationships are just like any other personal relationship. They require time, maintenance, ongoing work, regular feedback. I mean, I always say, like, my husband, I can't imagine if we went through all of 2017 not talking about our marriage or how, you know, we're raising our children or any of our problems. And then on December 31st, he's like, Megan, I want to sit down. I want to talk about 2017. You had a rough patch in the spring. Don't want that to happen again. I mean, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. This is not a once-a-year process. The annual review is one component of a year-round ongoing maintenance of a personnel relationship. Next myth is that it's only for managers. So, right, some people think it's just HR. Some people think it's just for the managers. I mean, hey, management's in the title, performance management. Again, reminding people that it's everyone's responsibility. So what does this mean for us also is that sometimes we have to engage in this dialogue we're having about performance management, but also training. Okay? Training our people to understand what our system is, what we hope to get out of the system. And sometimes that even means communications training, how we're talking to each other. Educate the folks. Okay, next myth. Oh, all right. If I could send you home with a packet today to talk about that said, okay, here, just implement this system, right? Just download this and you'll be fine. I would, but I can't because there's no one size fits all approach, all right? We're going to talk about ways to generate thinking about performance management, right? You know, it's year round, it's not once a year, that sort of thing. And then we're going to talk to you about different tools. But there is no one uniform approach that's going to work for everything. You know, one of my colleagues always likes to say culture is king. I like to say culture is queen. And my lovely associate, Janice, I didn't even realize you're in the back there. One of my great associates in the back says the gender of the culture does not matter, but culture itself does matter. And it's really important that you are doing something that's going to work for you and your workforce. Next myth is that an effective performance management system eliminates risk. Let's just get this out of the way. There is no zero risk situation when we are dealing with employees. There is not. There is nothing I can do that will eliminate your risk. I am sorry. Any other lawyer who's telling you that is selling a bag of goods. Oh, Karen, you're back there too. Karen always says, okay, so Karen's the one who says culture is king. I say queen. Anyways, kumbaya, everyone's here. So that is a complete and total myth. Now, can we have a good performance management system that reduces risk? Absolutely. If you are communicating effectively with your employees, You are managing not only performance, but expectations. You are documenting where appropriate, and we're going to talk about that. And all of that happens to be in line with this liability situation down the road. Well, that works out beautifully for me. If I can look back and say, well, they communicated about issues, they encouraged training and good performance, their documentation is consistent with everything they've been saying. This employee is now coming back and saying this had nothing to do with performance, but was a protected characteristic, and I can show the whole history. Sure, that's a benefit. Love you, favorite client, but that still doesn't eliminate the risk. So, next myth. Oh, Marcia's favorite, excuse me. Ratings are always objective and always justify decisions. So, this is a total myth. Why? Well, Marcia's going to talk about this more. But here's one of the things I upset a lot of my colleagues when we put this in our email. Because as employment lawyers, we want to say, of course, they're objective. We don't want them to be subjective, and we don't want to be playing favorites because inconsistencies give rise to liabilities, right? But let's be honest, all right? You have a supervisor who is evaluating an employee and who is giving their impression of how the year went or should be going. Marcia, why don't you take over and talk about this one a little bit more?
All right. So let's just say, how many of you would agree that managing multiple responsibilities is a part of most of our jobs? Right? Would you say that that's pretty critical, particularly in today's environment? So what I'd like to see is someone who feels like they are pretty good at managing multiple responsibilities. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Okay, great. Could you come up here for a moment and be my volunteer? Please. There'll be something in it for you. I promise it won't hurt. So, managing multiple responsibilities. Come right up here. You won't need that yet. So what I'd like you to do is demonstrate. We're going to have a bit of a metaphor here. You're going to demonstrate juggling. Because juggling, you know, managing multiple responsibilities. So go ahead. Oh, let's give her a hand. Thank you. Stay up here for a minute. We're not quite done yet. All right, so you've all seen how Becky has managed multiple responsibilities, right? Now, we have a room full of leaders here who are in a position to rate your performance. So let's rate Becky's performance. She said she was a good multitasker, that she could juggle multiple responsibilities. Does this look familiar? Yeah. Right? Oh, yeah. How many of you thought that Becky did not meet expectations? A few of you. Come on, she didn't juggle, right? Okay. How many of you thought Becky met expectations?
Raise your hands high, people.
Sure. I mean, come on. Becky came here, had a nice lunch, met with some friends, is listening. You know, she didn't think she was coming here today to show everybody she could juggle. Right? So for a lot of you, she met expectations. How many of you thought Becky actually exceeded expectations?
I do.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I couldn't have done that.
Way harsh crowd, guys.
Right? So here we have, you all saw the same thing, and yet you've all rated it differently. And this is what we're talking about when we say ratings are not objective. They're very subjective. They're dependent on a number of factors that's going on with the supervisor internally and externally, the employee, what's been communicated. And so what we propose is let's get rid of the ratings. Now, we do have to do something to substitute that, right? We can't just, although there have been hundreds of books written on let's just get rid of the performance evaluation altogether. We don't propose that either. But we do see that falling back on ratings as something that's objective is just really a myth. Becky, thank you very much. I'm going to
Thanks, Becky. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so as Marcia said, we're not here to tell you that you have to do away with your annual performance review. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the articles about those organizations who are moving away from it, but remember, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. We're never going to see a country where everybody's doing the exact same thing in every organization, nor would we want to. We're not robots. We're dealing with people, different organizations, different goals, okay? But if you are going to have an annual performance review, we want to talk a little bit about it. So first, can I get a show of hands of those who work at an organization that uses an annual performance review? That's a pretty clear majority. Okay, and so of those who utilize an annual performance review, how many can say, and maybe you don't want to raise your hands, that you consistently do it at around the same time every year? Okay, still, you know what? Y'all can go home. You're great. Go. You don't need me. No, I mean, still a large show of hands, but definitely I would say we lost a third of the group there. So, you know, that's problem number one, inconsistency. We find that the reviews are either not being done. We're promising in a handbook they're going to be done. We're telling employees they're going to be done. They're not being done. And that disintegrates trust. It devalues the performance evaluation. And then we're finding that sometimes we're doing them, sometimes we're not. We're doing them at different times of the year. And this all sort of erodes the process and erodes what employees can derive out of it. And it erodes the trust in your performance management system. And then also another inconsistency that we see is sometimes they're written and sometimes they're not. I personally am a big fan of, if you're going to do an annual review, have something in writing. Now, that doesn't mean you only have something in writing. We want to be talking and communicating with our employees, particularly in person, as much as possible. I know a lot of organizations have remote employees, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. And that's not to say, particularly in this modern day and age, you can't have that. But where we can at least be communicating over the phone, video conference, in person, but also supporting that with some documentation, I'm a big fan. So problem number two is they're either overvalued or undervalued. So, and that's not just by the organization, that's by the employee as well. So the overvaluing will come where an organization says, you know, this is the one leg we stand on. This is our performance management system. And frankly, it's just, you know, it's not enough to get the best out of your employees, in my personal opinion. And the same thing with the employees themselves. They'll overvalue it. They want to see their entire compensation, their future, their everything. I mean, the hat is being hung on that one meeting, or they're undervalued. Okay, we're not doing them consistently. Managers don't believe in them, so they're phoning them in. They're busy. They have a deadline for a member, whatever it is. And so they're just completely phoning them in, and then they're not valued by the managers, and then they're not valued by the employees. So we see it tends to go one way or the other. Another issue is that they look backwards. So here the title, annual performance, you know, the evaluations, what went wrong. It's kind of a play on words because we find that's an issue we're seeing with organizations' evaluations, is they're all about what went wrong. They look backwards, and you can just throw up the next one too, because I think they go hand in hand. They're also corrective in focus. So what do I mean by that? If we are trying to further the goals of the organization, and by doing that, we're looking at the individual performer, their goals, the team, you know, taking stock of the team, their goals, all to further the organization's mission, shouldn't we be more forward-looking? But instead, we're like, remember all that stuff that happened last year? Rather than using last year to think about how we can be better next year. So that's the backward looking. And then they tend to be all pick. You know what? I don't like it when my mother does it. I don't like it when my husband does it. Sorry, Karen, pass. I don't like it when my boss does it. Okay? You know, evaluate my performance without just telling me about all of the things that I did wrong. And we want to be infusing some positivity in there. We are human, you know, show of hands, who likes to get a compliment? I do. Who appreciates it when someone says thank you? I do. I mean, these are things that we learn as children and then forget as employers. We want to be rewarding good at performance because, again, being forward thinking, we want the people to keep doing the good things and constantly improve. Also, these goals tend to be demotivating. So they're often, and I think this kind of goes with the next one, they're really, oh, no, sorry, not yet. They're really task-oriented. So, you know, they're all about timeliness or, you know, filing or whatever it may be, which filing is important, timeliness is important. But what I would encourage you guys to do when you're doing a review, we want to, we want to bring the employees under the tent. We want to have them furthering the organization's goals, right? We want to bring them in on what not just the organization's goals are, but as a manager, what are our goals? Why do I need that filing on time? What is it important? Why is it important? What are my project goals for next year? And how is the work that you're doing going to further those goals? Instead, it tends to be really demotivating. Like you're not, you've got your typos in your emails and your filing and all these things that are important, but we want to be showing employees that they're part of a bigger picture. All right, now halos and horns. This is another problem we see. So what will happen is somebody will be fine during the year and then they'll totally blow something, which is not good. But then that's their whole review. Okay, the whole thing is this one bad thing happened. And we see time and time again, it's often with that particular supervisor, and then that's the review. Okay, and that's a death knell for an employee. If they're getting this review after all of these years of dedicated service and good performance, and they're being evaluated on this one bad incident. Similarly, we can have somebody who really struggled, but then we see that they really tried in the end, and they had this one great report or project, and then the entire review is about that report or project. Again, we want to not just be looking back, we want to be looking forward. And in looking forward, it's assessing the entire individual and seeing what we can carry into next year. Another issue is we'll see is I call it the friend first reviewer. So people don't want to be honest, those doing the review, because they're friends with the people they're reviewing and they want to be liked and they want to be popular. And well, let me let you in a little secret. Being a good leader does not necessarily mean being popular. This is probably a horrendous example, but the person who always pops in my mind is Steve Jobs. Apparently not nice. Sorry if anybody here is friends with him, and RIP, but nobody can deny that, he led an army. So it's not a popularity contest, and we see that as a common issue.
And that's particularly true in nonprofits, where it's always important to be liked. So a number of you had mentioned that you're looking at your process, and for those of you who are developing an effective process, as we keep saying, there's a lot of different directions you can go in, but there's a few things that I can tell you from experience can really help if you'll take this into consideration as you're developing a process. The first one is obtain leadership buy-in with the larger objectives. And there's a lot of leaders in the room. And so all of you together in your organization need to get on the same page about what it is that you're trying to obtain and make sure that you're sticking true to those objectives. So I mentioned the 4 R's earlier. Using that, but not getting right down into the discussion about should we have ratings or not. That's the sausage making that comes later. But get everybody on the same page that whatever system we have, however we accomplish it, these objectives are going to be what we're measuring it against. Create a consultative committee, which if you're in HR, if you're going to be going back and talking to your HR leaders, I think a really important thing that worked when I was implementing a few different performance evaluation systems was that I created a committee and I brought them in. They were, kind of higher level people. And the first thing I said is, I'm not going to ask you to do any work. All I'm going to ask you for is your opinion. Well, they were fine with that, and because they always have an opinion, right? But what it did is it gave control back to HR and the leadership of trying to obtain these larger objectives. So I've been in organizations where you have a 12-person committee who's trying to come up with a performance evaluation system, and 2 years later they can't settle on one particular question. This can help things move along where you're testing, you're getting agreement, they're going out and talking to people about, wow, I like the direction this is going in. You're getting input, but you're not getting bogged down in every single step that you need to take. Use focus groups, which is as you're defining certain things. So if you're going to be defining competencies, for example, that you want to measure against, take those out to the organization at all levels and say, does this sound like, what you would need to do at your level? Get that feedback so that when you finally present it, you're not presenting it to a crowd who's seeing it for the first time. And that can also help you generate support throughout the organization. Because let's face it, when employees hear that you're going to get a new performance evaluation system, the tension goes up because they don't know what it's going to look like. Be transparent, but be thoughtful. You hear a lot about transparency these days, and it's very important. But it's also very important, and Megan's going to get into this in much more detail, communication is everything. You do want to let people know what's going on. You do want to let them know, not surprise them or make them feel like you're in a back room somewhere taking care of something and you're going to spring it on them. But you need to be thoughtful. If you communicate ideas or changes in a vacuum, the first thing you're going to get is resistance. And so think about how that communication plan, and I always tell people when they're implementing a new process, your communication plan needs to be developed first, right? And you don't wait until you've got it all done and then sit down and think about how we're going to communicate this. It needs to be going along as you're working. I think a great thing to do is to launch a new system with training. And what I mean is when we implemented a new performance evaluation at ACDI VOCA, the first opportunity people saw it in its entirety was when they came to training, because that's our opportunity to really have their attention and focus on how did we get from where we were to where we are, why are we doing it this way, so they can see the whole big picture instead of hearing about this, it's not going to have ratings anymore. Well, gee, how are we going to be measured? How's anybody going to know I'm any good? And so launching a new system with training gives them all of the information that they can have so they can walk out of the room and feel confident that they are going to know how to do it. There are components of an effective process that we're going to go through in detail. These are the things that we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about. It needs to be an interactive process. We need to create forward-looking reviews, like Megan was saying. We need to structure around dialogue, a conversation, and not ratings. We need to provide developmental goals instead of a list of tasks that are already on their job description. We need to link goals to organizational objectives for obvious reasons that we'll get into. And we need to reinforce core values, right? So, because it's just as important how people go about doing something than what it is that they do.
So taking the first one, focusing on an interactive process, I love this picture. I mean, if you haven't picked up on this, I'm super jazzed about the topic of performance management. My team in the back was rolling their eyes when they heard I was going to be talking about it yet again. But I love it because, again, I love this picture. This picture says it all to me, boss versus leader. I understand that you have a structure and there's an org chart, and I'm not asking you to change that. But to the extent you can start thinking of everybody on this horizontal plane, and how does that change your thinking about your process? How is that going to change your thinking about your dialogue? Again, it makes it more interactive. And the first part of being interactive is self-assessing and being mindful. Okay, first, how many people in the room have somebody who, directly reports to them? I'll put it in air quotes just in case it's loosey-goosey. All right, that's a lot of folks. Okay, so of those folks that just raised their hands, I would like to know, please raise your hand if you have ever sat down, at least in the last year, and said, would I want to work for me? I got 3. That is awesome. That is awesome, and I think that's great. But there are only 3 of you who raise your hands. And so I would encourage you to self-assess, okay, to be aware of, what you are doing well in the leadership category. And also, I could spend all day talking about leadership, but what you're doing well, what you think you could be doing differently, being mindful of, your own weaknesses as a leader and what you can do to change that, and being mindful. Like one thing is actually doing a self-evaluation. And a lot of organizations implement that for employees of a certain level, and then they stop. And I don't know why they stop. I think a self-evaluation is great. I think it's actually great to schedule time. Look, we're all busy, but even once a quarter, just to sit down and say, like, okay, I'm going to take stock of myself as a leader.
Well, and a simple analogy, please, Megan, is if you were trying to get to the Charles Bridge in Prague, what do you need to know? Where are you? Exactly. I mean, because it's going to make a difference if you're sitting here on Massachusetts Avenue, or you're in California, or you're on the moon. The directions are going to be different, right? And so employees need to know where they are, and they need to learn how to assess where they are in order to impact where they're going next.
Absolutely. And that's part of taking stock, which is, I believe, the next one. Yeah. Right. That's not just taking stock of yourself and your program, but it's also taking stock of your team. Okay, you don't work with robots. Everybody has their different strengths. Everybody has their different weaknesses. Everybody has their different motivators and processes. And I think part of getting the most out of your workforce is not only self-assessing, but taking stock of your team, your goals, and the needs. And this is, this whole idea of performance management, it's an art, not a science, okay? And it's an ongoing process. So that might mean different things in different organizations, but it does mean work, I have to say. I hate to break it to everybody. It means work, and it means ongoing regular work. You want to lose weight, you got to get to the gym, unless you're blessed with great genetics, and then, you know what, good for you. I'm super jealous. But you don't just say all of a sudden one day, I'm going to be strong and lose weight. It's a process. Health is a process. Dieting, going to the gym, all of this. God, can you tell I'm hungry? So, and I think that getting the best out of your workforce is the same as maximizing your own health. It's a goal, but it also requires ongoing tasks. Encourage two-way communication. Part of this interactive process is, not just you understanding what you could be doing better, but welcoming feedback from your team. Now, some organizations, this looks like, a 360 review. Others, it's just implementing an open door process. Whatever it is, communicate that you are open to feedback, not only about your leadership, but also about the methods by which you're going about achieving your goals. And, that means gathering your team and figuring out what could have been done differently in order to be better next time.
And I often push back on managers sometimes who say, well, I don't know why they didn't come talk to me. I have an open door policy. And I always push back and say, yeah, when have you gotten up and walked out that door? Go talk to people, go see them. You may leave your door open, but they may feel intimidated to come in.
Yeah. Absolutely. Big part of that is communication and inquiry over advocacy. A lot of times we get together with somebody or with a team, and it's everybody advocating their own point of view, as opposed to, again, being open to saying, how can we be collaborating better? How can next year be better? How can we, further the organization's goals, work together better as a team? There's a lot of question asking out loud and just to yourself as part of the assessment. Okay, and making space for feedback on both sides. I mean, this is kind of, part of one of the same. One is structuring the way you're thinking. The other one is, to Marcia's point about open door, actually making it a reality that you welcome feedback. We are hiring people that we value ostensibly, and, we want to hear what they think. Okay, and again, I have this, the different way that we're thinking of leadership. I've already talked about that multiple times, but thinking about how you can look at leadership as flat is the word I like to use, as opposed to tall. And again, bringing people in, working together as part of a team.
So when we talk about create forward-looking reviews, it can be a little intimidating if you've removed the ratings, right? You don't have this Chinese menu of things to pick one from column A and one from column B, and that's how the review gets written. You've basically got a blank page, and you're expecting people to write something on it. A really easy tool that you can give people to write reviews, whether they're self-assessing or if it's the manager writing the review. At ACDI Voca, we created 2 boxes, what we call, for shorthand, the now box and the next box. The now box was really demonstrated competencies, what they're doing now, what they've shown they can do. And the next box is, okay, building on those strengths, what can you do next in order to develop your professional career? A good template to give, because it's still kind of a blank page there and it can be intimidating, there's a very simple template you can provide. What did Pat do? Pat demonstrated something, right? Pat demonstrated an ability to, by doing what it was that Pat did, and what was the outcome? Very simple structure. And then in the next box, it's the same thing. Pat can improve her ability to, whatever it is that Pat does well, by doing X, which can result in Y. And that way people have a structure for how to give feedback instead of just saying, you're a 3.5 or you meet expectations.
That plays right into this next slide, which is structure that communication, that review around dialogue rather than ratings. Marcia used a great example of you're giving directions. The first thing you know is where is the person? Also download Waze or Google Maps. I don't know how to get anywhere anymore. Thank you, Uber. But no, you need to know where you are in order to know where you're going, and using concrete examples. Now, I know I said we want to be forward looking, but as Marcia just explained, you can use concrete examples from present day or past in order to improve performance moving forward. And and I see time and time again, I'll talk to clients and we'll be talking about, either, some soft skills like improving communications, or we're talking about an actual problematic employee. And I ask about the dialogue or communications that have happened so far. I said, oh, no. We told them they need to be better. Well, that super helpful. Thanks. Be better. That doesn't, be better in what and how and what happened that we can change moving forward. So giving people more information so that they understand how they can grow. Oh, I skipped ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. We talked about creating developmental goals, and Megan talked about how, a task list is not really a motivating goal. I like to talk about discipline goals, and when I use the term discipline, I know that most of you are thinking discipline in that I'm going to get up every morning and run 2 miles. I'm not talking about that kind of discipline. I'm talking about discipline as a body of work, a body of study, what it is to get better in your profession. And so like the discipline of playing the piano, you never finish. There's always something else you can do. Creating discipline goals for employees can help them visualize how they're going to become better at whatever chosen profession they have. But that's not enough. You can't just say, well, why don't you increase your ability to do X? You have to find a way to measure it, right? And so you use the measurements to track the progress. And it's usually the measurements that end up being the goal in a lot of reviews, back to that task list. So let me give you an example. A discipline goal, let's say we have an HR director. A discipline goal for an HR director would very likely be improve my ability to attract and keep quality talent. Could you agree on that? And that's probably going to be a goal for the next several years or maybe even longer. But over time, that ability increases. So a measure might be assessed and improved a current recruitment process, right? Would that improve someone's ability to attract and keep quality talent? Absolutely. The next review period, it might be designed and implemented a college recruiting program. Then it might be established an onboarding program. You see, and so you've got the task that people are doing, but they're able to look back over years, and instead of having a string of tasks that they got done, they can see how their discipline goal has helped them improve in their career choice. I often talk about you can have 20 years of experience or 1 year of experience 20 times. And so what we want is 20 years of experience where we really feel like we're developing and growing as we go along in our profession. This helps people visualize that, and it makes better employees, right? They become more valuable to the organization. So ultimately, when I go back to those 4 R's, one of the things was about the meeting the organizational goals. We can set up wonderful goals for employees all day long, and if they don't help move the organization forward, they're of no use to us, right? And so one of the tasks that we have is to make sure that our employees and their activities and efforts are aligned with our organization's mission. So the department plans and the strategic plans that your organizations write every year or every few years need to be linked up with the performance review goals, which basically come from the now and the next box, right? Because if you're writing reviews, it says, here's where you are and here's where you need to go. And if that's aligned with what the organization is trying to do, because organizations are constantly evolving in what they need to accomplish in order to stay successful. And those goals tend to just emerge out of those now and next boxes. And that way they link to the organizational objectives. And the bonus through that is that people can see how they are contributing to the organization's success. And that makes for a motivated employee. So we also talked about reinforcing core values, right? I talk all the time about how it's not just what you do, it's how you went about doing it. If you leave, a string of dead bodies in your wake as you're going forward being successful, that's not going to be good for the organization. So you need to define behavior standards for your particular organization. And again, these are different for every organization. Every culture is different. And employees need to know what that culture is so that they know how to behave. And in order to keep people on the same page, you have to measure it. Measure them on those standards in your review system. Have a section that clearly defines how you expect people to behave, and then measure them on it.
Okay, so we're going to spend probably the next 7.5 hours talking about communication. So if anybody needs a break. No, but we could. It is so important. It's not just a factor. It's everything. We need to be communicating with each other on a regular and ongoing basis. We need to be managing expectations, setting goals, giving feedback. I don't ever want somebody to learn something for the first time in a written annual review. That's a real breakdown in the system. There should be no surprises in that review, in my opinion. And it's not just about saying, okay, let's talk more. It's about thinking about when we're talking and what we're talking about, and really assessing, like we said in the beginning, taking stock of your system and figuring out, not just between you and other employees, you and your team, but as an organization, what is our communication system? Is it effective? Are we doing it enough? So I have here both informal and formal, because, communication should be real time, responsive, reactive, and also scheduled. What do I mean by that? Somebody has, an issue or even it's a positive thing, and to the extent that you can in that moment, address it. Letting them know what a great job they did, that you're grateful, letting them know, what they could be doing differently next time, trying to address situations in real time, and having ongoing communication, again, about what your expectations are, but also scheduled. So you have your annual review, or maybe in addition to the annual review, or in lieu of, you have regular team meetings. I love Janice loves a regular team meeting. They don't always happen, but they're a good goal to sit down and assess what's going on with the team, but that should never be in place of just picking up the phone and talking to somebody. So check-ins, appraisals, feedback, set intervals where you can. We're going to meet once a month as a team, but please don't make promises that you can't keep, because that disintegrates trust. And we're not going to get the best out of our team when they don't trust us. And trust is key. You know, and I say this, you know, try to handle things in real time, but also we're dealing with people. So please assess the situation. You know, I had somebody who told me that they got sort of the most like intense critical feedback of their life, like while somebody was watching them. They had morning sickness, like vomit into a trash can. And you know, maybe that moment is not the time to address it, okay? So, you know, again, we're not robots. So if you say, we are meeting Monday morning at 10 o'clock to talk about that review, and you walk in and that person is vomiting into a trash can, maybe move it to 12. Maybe move it to the next day. Just a thought. So we do want to assess the situation. We are human beings. I know that sometimes I am in a better position to hear things, to learn things, to grow from them, and I'm guessing I'm not that unique. So that's not to say that I want you to be scared of it and leave it all to 1 year, but just, again, don't be robotic. Assess the situation. Okay, so what are we talking about? Everything. You know, I mean, don't overshare. You don't need to tell everyone every detail of your personal life, because too much sharing disintegrates trust too. But what do we want to be talking about? We want to be talking about the overall employee, team goals, organization goals, right? And forward looking. So you can just throw these all up because they're all kind of, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. So we're talking about all of it, right? Taking this holistic approach. Please don't be stingy with your praise. This is the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay? We want it all. We want to be transparent, not just about our performance management system, but about what we're expecting from our employees. So please give positive feedback, reward good performance. You know, we all like it. If you don't, you're not the norm. And that helps people to repeat those behaviors moving forward. But also, you know, the bad stuff too. I think it's really great, even when a team leader will take their team and they all kind of share what they could have done differently. I think it's helpful for people to see their leaders as human beings as well. Again, without oversharing. You don't need to get them all together and talk about how horrendous your date went on Friday night, but maybe get them together and talk about how you had this issue with a report that was due. There's Kim Malone-Scott worked with Sheryl Sandberg at Google, and she used to gather her team together once a week, and she had the mess up monkey, and it was this stuffed animal, and the team would have to go around and everybody would have to say one thing that went wrong that week, no matter how big or small, and then they would all vote on the biggest mess up, and then that person would keep the monkey on their desk. I mean, there's something pretty great about that, because we are going to fail. We're human. But please keep it development oriented. Even when we do focus on the bad and the ugly as part of the good, bad, and ugly, how can that improve performance moving next year? What changes can be made?
Well, and two things I'd like to add to that, Megan. And one is that you have to make sure that you have a culture that allows mistakes. And if you don't, your organization is going to be in jeopardy. But people need to understand that how helpful it is to be able to air your errors so that you can learn from it and others can avoid making that same mistake.
Yeah, we want to be thinking about people as continuous learners.
And the other thing I just wanted to add is that how many of you have been successful changing somebody? Yeah. Well, good for you. I've never been able to change anyone. And so we really want to focus with employees and our review systems. We really want to focus on identifying where their real talent is and developing that, not trying to make them good at something they're never going to be good at.
So then next, I have, anybody remember the Spartan cheerleaders? Yay! You don't have to be a Spartan cheerleader. That's not what I'm saying. But to the extent we can inject a little positivity in the system, I think that's always a good thing. So, okay, communication. How are we communicating? people love email. Whatever. It's a great thing to have, but people rely on it so heavily. Can you walk down the hall? Can you pick up the phone? And think about the impact of putting something in writing and being sort of selective about when we're doing that. What words are you using? What tone are you using? If you are not using constructive language, if you're yelling, if you're throwing things, I know these should be obvious, but they're not, or I wouldn't get so many calls about them. You're completely undermining your message. And the word choice goes beyond the obvious. Stay away from profanity, great. But also, I got a call about a supervisor who, when she didn't like somebody, she would say, "You were completely worthless." Okay, yes. Instead of saying, in this situation, you were unhelpful, this was unhelpful, this thing you did, and what could we do differently next time? She actually just went around telling people they were worthless. That is worthless, okay? That's not helping us. Like we said earlier, be clear, specific, use examples where possible. And then also, as part of this dialogue, can anybody tell me what the most important part of communication is? Listening. Yes, for those of you on the WebEx, the audience got it right. Listening. I find we don't listen enough. I'm so guilty of it. Chat. But listening is the most important thing as part of the communications process. Okay, why are we communicating? All right, so remember the goal. The goal is to get the best out of our workforce, okay? So how can we further that goal? We can further it by letting people know what they're doing. We can further it by avoiding surprises, okay? It doesn't help if somebody's getting a shock on the review. Also, why are we doing it? To get us all thinking, be more self-aware, team-aware, organization-aware. Now, I keep saying this, but also, here's where I'm going to do a little liability plug. Okay, the avoiding surprises bit, if you are completely silent on someone's performance for an entire year and then you fire them, their brain spirals out of control, and they think it must be something nefarious. I see it time and time and time again, and so do all the lawyers in the back, okay? So if we are communicating, if we are managing expectations, it doesn't mean that they're not going to go down and file a claim, but the chances are diminished, one, and then all of this communication can be used as evidence to support the defense that you have made a legitimate business decision, and you communicated that decision. You worked with your employees. And building trust, that too. Building trust and confidence. Again, we're not hiring people to fire them. We're not hiring them to discipline them. We're hiring them to get the best out of them for the best for the organization. Okay, also, Karen Pass in the back always likes to say is the left hand talking to the right. We want our situation to be coordinated, okay? And what does that mean? We don't want each supervisor kind of going rogue on their performance management system. One supervisor does an annual review, the other doesn't. We want some sort of consistency. Now, we do take an individual approach based on the situation, based on the employee. But all of the strategies that Marsha articulated earlier are great for us thinking about what is our culture of performance management, what is the approach that we're going to be taking. Let's be somewhat unified in that. So amongst the team, but also across the organization. Inconsistencies give rise to liabilities. One of the things I'm about to talk about are the tools in the performance management tool chest. So we've got, written warnings, coaching and counseling, performance improvement plans. And with all of those, if you have one supervisor who understands those tools, and part of this, is, again, communication and training, but the others don't, and so maybe somebody on their team is getting a performance improvement plan or certain forms of discipline and no one else is, again, the brain starts to spiral. Why am I being singled out? Why am I being targeted? Is it because of my age? Nobody else in the organization gets this. So inconsistencies give rise to liability. Also, is our documentation coordinated? So do supervisors understand what goes into a performance improvement plan? Have you talked with them about that? Is what you're doing in your performance management system inconsistent with what is in your handbook? Are you making promises you can't keep? Are you breaking those promises?
Got it, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So there's a lot, as we've been saying, about performance management, and that could take up several days if you had the time to listen. But we've put some guide sheets in your book that we hope that you can find useful. The first one is on performance management. There are 6 different things there. The way this is structured, at first it tells you how to implement it, and then it gives you some tips for implementation. All of these things can be fairly easily done with very little or no budget. And so there's 6 items on performance management. We also want to talk for just a minute about setting the tone from day one because, and we're going to get into millennials in a little while, but, you know, people don't stay in jobs for a long time anymore. And so it becomes even more critically important that they be effective from day one. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to implement a successful onboarding program. And if you invest in it, you'll have productive, engaged employees. Educate about your mission, particularly nonprofits who are very mission-oriented. That's why they came to your organization. Make sure that they understand it and feel connected to it. Explain your culture, what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. They need to know what the standards of behavior are for your organization. Is it safe to make a mistake and not hide it? Reinforce your values, which we've been talking about all afternoon. Link employees to resources. I was talking with a few of you down before the presentation started, and I said, we never focus on managers when we're doing our training, particularly for performance evaluations and performance management, because we put employees in charge of their own career. Our obligation is to give them the tools and the resources to do their job and help them get the information that they need, including feedback. So linking employees to resources early on helps them find what they need in order to do their job well. Define training for your organization. Too many people think of training in one way, and that is, I am sitting in a seat, someone's telling me something for an hour and a half. Training, 97% of training occurs on the job, and you are doing a lot of things in your organization that are really helping people learn how to do the job that you're not taking credit for. And employees want to feel like employers are investing in them. So the second thing we have is 6 different strategies that you can implement regarding onboarding, which talks of everything from a guidebook to a goal worksheet. The third thing we have is on skill development. Again, these are 6 different ways that you can help people learn what they need to do in order to do their job better, and they don't require a large training budget. So we hope you'll find these useful.
Okay. It's not me, it's you. Confronting performance issues. So, you know, we've held hands, we've kumbaya'd, we've talked about organizational goals, but, you know, when you have a problem, you got to fix it, right? And how do you do that? So first, we have to understand the players and the tools. So who's involved? Now, obviously, the employee at issue is involved, but who else? So many times I'll get a call about a situation and I'll find out, well, you know, this person rushed in the room and this person didn't. And if we could just take a minute, take a deep breath, assess the situation, figure out what's going on. Do we have HR? How does HR play a role? Whether or not we have HR, what supervisor or supervisors should or should not be involved. And it's really important to understand that. Are there 2 people who are part of the performance issue? Just one? We don't want a firing squad. I mean, we don't want to be, you know, lining people up here. We want to be thoughtful about who is going to be part of this corrective process. And then even if other individuals need to be sort of, you know, brought into the decision making, maybe all of those people aren't in the room when we're meeting with the employees. So we're not necessarily ganging up on them. So thinking about who's involved is twofold. Who affects this situation and should be a part of the decision making, but also who is going to actually help us carry out our process. And understanding the tools at issue, okay? Is this a situation where we're going to correct a performance issue? And I'm going to get into each one of these, you know, using just, you know, some simple conversation, a little coaching, counseling. Do we need other forms of training? Do we need to be writing things down? And part of that, in order to figure out what we're going to do, is we have to diagnose the problem. You know, what is the issue here? And it could be any number of things. Do we have somebody who needs help? Do we have somebody who is just, over it and the writing's on the wall? Is this performance? Is this behavioral? What is going on? And then we want to determine the desired outcome. Sometimes it's simple. We want Stacy to get to work on time. Okay. Sometimes it's not so simple. We want Stacy to be better. And then we have to dig in a little bit deeper and figure out what better means. And in order to help Stacy be better or get to work on time, we need to pick the right tools to help her get there. So let's go over those tools at your toolbox. So we have informal counseling. Now, you might just call that conversation. And that's fine too, but that's letting somebody know what the issue is and finding out, remember, two-way, how you can help them get there. And sometimes that's just a part of solving the problem, and sometimes that is solving the problem in and of itself. Now, the question I get a lot is, okay, when I'm having these conversations, when do I document? All right, well, that really depends. I know the worst lawyer answer ever, but it does. Sometimes the situation calls for a simple conversation, okay? Again, the easiest example, and we can extrapolate this out, is getting to work on time. I mean, that's always the one that's like, if you're going to liken it to math, it's 1 + 1 = 2, okay? So getting to work on time is the baseline. Now, you tell somebody, I need you to get to work on time. I don't know that you necessarily need to write that down. Well, you tell them, and then they still don't come to work on time. So maybe the second time it's, I'm going to need you, here's your schedule. I'm going to need you to come to work on time, just like we talked about last month. And then you follow up with either an email to them, just confirming our conversation, really appreciate that you're going to make a better effort to get to work on time. Maybe it's sending an email to yourself. So if you ever need to recall that on such and such a date, and this is the old school, some people keep journals, or calendars and noting it down and they save it. But maybe it's just an email to yourself or to Stacy about showing up on time. Coaching, training. So this is more than just, letting them know that you have an expectation about getting to work on time. This is for when we have a few more, complex problems. How can we coach somebody or train someone? And again, sometimes this does mean someone sitting down in a room and talking with them about workplace boundaries, for example. But then sometimes it means actually working with them on a report and going line through line on how things can be written differently or how we can engage with members differently or other employees differently. So coaching and training can mean different things, but it's a little bit more than just chatting with them. Figuring out where we need a specific modification. So that might mean a couple of things. This person needs to modify their behavior, or sometimes what we'll see is there's actually modification of the process. So often we'll have this great employee who really tends to drop the ball on one specific thing. And we take stock. Is this a thing we can handle the ball being dropped on? Sometimes in this position with this person in this team, no. And then maybe it's not going to work. But sometimes maybe we can shift responsibilities so that this really great asset to the team is not responsible for, this one maybe non-essential function that somebody else could do. And we could swap it around. So modification of the process as well. A warning. Now, look, I can put labels on all of these things. You can call it a warning. You can, call it a written coaching and counseling. People call it different things. But this is where I feel like we're turning up the heat a little bit. And warning is where you articulate the consequences. So when you're coaching and counseling and letting somebody know we're going to need you to show up to work on time, but then they don't, right? And then maybe you get to the point where either a supervisor or someone in HR is saying, if you don't start showing up to work on time, then you will be fired. A warning is we're beyond just chatting here, people. Now, when you issue a warning, I like for you to follow up in writing. And that can mean a couple of different things, like I said. Maybe it's you keeping a note to file, emailing a note to yourself on such and such day at this time. These two people were in the room, or I was in the room with my employee, met with this person, communicated what the goal is and what the consequences of not meeting the goal. So who was present when it happened? Either a warning can be in the personnel file, And I know not everybody, again, everybody has their different systems, but personnel file or a note to file, but something where we document that we articulated the consequences. Also, I say, a warning can be verbal. Still, my preference is if you're communicating consequences, you put it in writing. You don't have to give them a writing, but you at least document on your end. And then there's, people think of this in the form of progressive discipline. Some organizations have, well, first we have to do coaching counseling, then written warning, and then beyond a written warning is a suspension. If you have a progressive discipline system, follow it. But I like to advocate to individuals, to organizations that you don't have to engage in progressive discipline. What you need to be doing is you need to be clearly articulating goals and consequences. And maybe we have a performance issue that it's one and done. All right. So it's all about the situation. Okay, more tools. So a PIP, a performance improvement plan. Does anybody use PIPs? I love a PIP. Even the name is cute. Who doesn't love a PIP? Okay, so I think PIPs are great, but when they're used appropriately. All right, so what is a performance improvement plan? A performance improvement plan is a great tool when we have a reasonable goal that we can clearly articulate, okay, where we have guideposts and benchmarks for how we can see improvement, and we can see improvement within a certain timeline, all right? And I want these goals to be realistic. You're not going to give a performance improvement plan to Stacy to be better, okay? But if Stacy is having trouble delivering a report in a certain fashion or a certain time, or, eliminating typos in our publications, whatever it may be, then you can write down what Stacy needs to achieve. And we want to see immediate and sustained improvement. Now, all of you who use PIPs, I want that in writing in every PIP, immediate and sustained. Let's again go back to 1 + 1 = 2. Let's say we do a PIP for timeliness. Let's say Stacy's got, is that anybody here's named Stacy? I'm really sorry. I'm just like on the Stacy train. Do we have a Stacy? Oh, good. Stacy's screwed. Okay. So Stacy is, has a timeliness issue for getting to work, but also meetings, whatever it is. Okay. A responsiveness and timeliness issue. We put in here that we are going to evaluate her, let's say, over a 60 or 90-day period. Some people will put timelines, and I always think that's a great idea. But regardless of the timeline in your PIP, you want that language in there that says immediate and sustained. Because you know what? Even though we might give Stacy a couple of chances, we want to see her showing up to time tomorrow and the entire course of the 90 days. The other thing we want in that PIP is we want to have a disclaimer in there that says it is not a guarantee of employment and it in no way affects the at-will status of employment, all right? This is not a contract. This is not a promise. This is saying, look, we want to work with you over the next whatever it is, 30, 60, 90 days. It's another way of saying you're on probation, okay? But we realistically think that we can help get you to that better place. Don't do it if it's not realistic. I don't like sham PIPs. But then also we want to see her trying right away. And if we see that she's either not trying or simply can't do it, whatever it is that we've clearly articulated in the PIP, then we're going to cut our losses before the 90 days is up. And we want language in there reserving that. And you want the consequences written in there too. So failure to demonstrate immediate and sustained improvement will result in, and it depends on what it is. It will result in termination, or it will result in discipline, including but not limited to termination. Because there are some performance issues where we're not ready to terminate if they don't, but maybe they have to engage in whatever, suspension or specific program. 9 times out of 10, it's termination if they can't make it in that period. But I understand there may be other situations. Now, documenting actions, I said this before, it really depends on the situation. But here's the thing. Even though I'm a lawyer and I love, the first thing I ask always, we're firing somebody for this issue and we expect they're going to sue. One of the first questions out of my mouth is, what do you have in the file? What did we talk to them about and what did we document? So my first 2 questions usually. So I love documentation, but I don't want, just like I don't want a sham PIP, I don't want sham documentation. The goal here is to improve performance, not just to, to cover ourselves. So I love this, this quote. You don't write because you want to say something. You write because you have something to say. So make it meaningful, please. Have intent in your writing, but also stick to the facts, please. I mean, look, I ask for your documentation. You send over the personnel file. You send over the notes. And I'm like, oh, my God, look at this beautiful file. And then I start reading, and it's filled with all of this commentary. Then I'm like, let this not go to court because I can't handle all this commentary. So just stick to the facts. What happened? When did it happen? Okay, what did you articulate to the person, and how did they respond? Yeah.
So what about millennials? Phew, I'm glad we got past that. Right? Yeah. We have to talk about them because they're taking over the world. Who are they? I think, it's funny, even when you Google a millennial, you get all these different answers about the time frame and when they're born. And for the most part, they were born between the early 1980s and the end of the 1990s. Now, Pew Research has defined that the first millennial was born in 1981, and the last millennial, for those of you who are happy to hear this, was born in 1997. So if you think this is a problem, don't worry. Generation Z is turning 17, and they're coming. So we'll be fine with this. They're the largest living generation. There are going to be 81 million. And you're thinking, Marcia, you just said the last one was born in 1997. Immigration of millennials into the United States. So I'm talking about figures here in the United States, 81 million millennials. Now, that's compared, by the way, there were a lot of us baby boomers, but we were only 75 million. And Generation X, there were 65 million. Now, for those of you who are Generation X, you kind of got short shrift because your generation only lasted 16 years for some reason. So you didn't get to build up your numbers quite as much. Millennials are the most diverse racially and ethnically than we've ever seen in the United States. They're the most highly educated, and therefore they're the most in debt. When I say they're taking over the world, the most common age in the United States right now is 22. That's a little scary.
I remember that age.
They also represent over 1 in 3 employees, and that was 2 years ago. In 2015, 1 out of 3 employees was a millennial. By 2025, it'll be 3/4 of the workforce will be millennials. So it's important that we figure them out. Before we get into attributes, though, I have to give the disclaimer that when we talk about millennials, we are not talking about any individual. And if you want to get somebody upset with you, just all you have to do is say, well, of course you think that, you're a millennial. People like to think they're unique, and they are unique. And so when we talk about the attributes that we're about to get into, that doesn't describe any particular person, obviously. It describes general attributes and trends that are being noticed. The other thing that I wanted to say is in 2013, I think, Time magazine came out with an article that was titled "The Me, Me, Me Generation, the Lazy, Narcissistic Millennials Who Still Live with Their Parents." And then the article went on to prove why that was correct. That somehow psychologically millennials were represented more highly in narcissism than other generations. Well, that's a pretty big hurdle to climb over if you're a millennial. But what has shaped them? Why are they the way they are? I think no one would deny that the greatest generation was greatly impacted by the Depression and by World War II. And so we all, each generation, are impacted by what is going on around us. Obviously, September 11th, which was a major change in how we felt about our own resourcefulness and our ability to be safe in our homeland abruptly changed on September 11th. The housing bust and the Great Recession, right? For a lot of people coming out of college, it was very difficult to find a job because they weren't hiring and they were in debt from student loans more than any other generation. Climate change risks, you know, which is something that generations in the past haven't had to think about quite so severely. And technology advances has changed the world, right? And you were going to talk about.
Well, I told Marsha I just wanted to make a comment that I find this impacts a lot of the work that I'm doing with organizations on either communications or leadership training, which is recognizing that the millennials are digital natives, and everybody who will come after, you know, my son is 6 and he's like an expert Minecraft builder or whatever. So, you know, my 3-year-old knows how to use an iPad. And what does that mean for you guys? It means that, going back to that communication slide, now more than ever, employees coming into the workforce are expecting real-time responsive communication. I mean, if I don't text my 20-year-old sister-in-law back within 5 minutes, she basically thinks I'm dead. And they call it talking. I mean, when you text someone, you talk. So keeping in mind that that might change how they communicate, but it also changes what they expect out of communications, including the timing of those.
Exactly. I think it's also important to understand that our impression of generations changes over time. I picked up on the internet that baby boomers are described as work-centric, goal-oriented, independent, self-actualized, and competitive. But I know when I was coming of age, the mantra for many of us was tune in, turn on, and drop out. And don't trust anybody over 30. And then we turned 30. And we kind of changed into this new description. And so it's the same for millennials, and I think that's already starting to happen. So let's take a look at how we view millennials. When you go to the internet or do some research, there's a lot of things that you'll see, and you've probably even uttered some of these terms yourself, having encountered millennials in the workforce. Short attention span, lazy, socially awkward, self-absorbed, entitled, narcissistic. It's, you know, and to some extent, pieces of that are true. But that's part of where that is coming from, is because each former generation has come up and sort of figured out how things work and how things work for them. And then a new generation comes along and starts challenging that. That doesn't sit well, and we're not too quick to embrace it. And so we start attaching these labels that are problematic. And if we stay here and we're stuck here, we're never going to be able to tap into the wonderful resources that they bring. So let's look at that. They're entrepreneurial. They're multitaskers, for real. They're idealistic. They're collaborative. They're authentic. They're committed, they're focused, all of those things as well. And it's important that we figure out how to take those things, and instead of feeling challenged when they come to us, that we are able to find ways to work with them and help them develop into the great professionals, because they're going to, as we say, they're going to take over the world. So what can we do? The first thing is that because all of you are from nonprofits, you're in a unique situation, because millennials as a whole really want to improve the world. They really, in higher numbers than ever before, want to make the world a better place. And you're a nonprofit. You are in a position to bring them in and link them to your mission and have a great worker. Embrace their use of technology, the digital native. They are going to use their own devices, whether you let them or not. And so programs like Bring Your Own Device to Work, and letting them incorporate, and I know this scares IT people, but they've got to be able to incorporate their work with their personal life, because work goes on 24/7 now, particularly if you're in a global environment. And so getting with your IT departments and figuring out how to keep your data safe, because it's going to be out there. They're going to be answering their email while they're sitting in a bar, or, integrating it into their own machinery. And so we have to find ways to embrace the use of technology. Find opportunities for learning outside their specialty. As someone in charge of training, this used to drive me crazy, because people would want to come in and go to a training session that had nothing to do with their job. And I would say, no, that's not appropriate. They need to work on their own job, and we don't want to move the focus away from the people who really need this information. But the fact is that millennials have lots of different interests, and they tend to look globally and more bigger picture. And so they want to learn things outside of what it is that they're right now responsible for. And that's great for us, because the best way to look at a problem is to get away from it and to look at it in a different context. And so people can learn about their own job and their own responsibilities, even though they're learning about something else. And so opening that up and not trying to pin them down into that one level of responsibility that they have. Let them work on multiple projects. I'm sure there are many of you in the room who have had someone come to you and say, I heard that this project is starting up and I want to be a part of it. And your response has been, well, you're already assigned to this big project. I know, but I can do this too. They haven't finished that project, but they want to start the other one. And that's where our mind starts thinking they're just short attention span. But in fact, they have a lot of different interests, and they're not necessarily going to drop the ball on the project they have by adding different responsibilities there. It's back to that idea of multitasking and being involved in more than one thing.
And I know for those of you who need to go at 2, we won't take it personally. This is the last slide on millennials. I have a quick one on mitigating risk, and then so we're home stretch.
Right. Flexibility and balance, as you know, they tend to work to live instead of live to work. And so making sure that you recognize that they aren't necessarily going to be doing their work from 8 to 5. They very likely are going to be doing it at off hours, and finding ways to find that flexibility. Being transparent and consistent. There is a high level of fairness in a lot of millennials who really want to feel like it's not just how you're treating me, I want to make sure that you're treating that person the same way. And so being open about how you're doing that and how you're making decisions. Ask their opinion. They have been asked what their opinion is since they were 2 years old. And they're used to being asked. And so you need to get used to asking their opinion. They may actually come back with something that you hadn't thought about, but even more importantly, they may reveal why it is that they're not buying into what you're proposing. And that way you have an opportunity to get it out there and address it. Reinforce and recognize often. Get used to it. But one thing I will say is that be careful, because if it's not sincere, they'll see it immediately. If it's rote, if it's, okay, it's your turn for me to recognize, it won't do any good. It has to be genuine. And map out the future with them. I was reading that the armed forces recruitment centers have had to change the way they recruit people into the military, because it used to be that people would come in, why should I be in the military? And they'd tell them. Now it's, I want to join the military and I'm going to do this for 4 years and then I'm going to go get my degree and then I want to do this and then I want to do that. How can you help me get there? They've been thinking about themselves their whole life. So they've got a plan and they want to make sure that you can help them with that plan. I would also say, communicate to them that you understand you're not hiring them for life. Be okay with letting go. Have a great onboarding system that gets them up to speed quickly, but know that they are someday going to leave you, and probably sooner than you think.
Okay, Marcia, feel free to throw all of these up because I'm actually going to jump to the end of this one because if you've been paying attention, everything we've been talking about mitigates risk. That's fine. The communication, transparency. The last two I want to talk about more importantly, blind spot, blind spot, blind spot. What are your blind spots you need to check? Okay, you need to check what your policies are. So Marcia just said, bring your own device to work. Well, do you have a policy on that? Do you have a policy diminishing the expectation of privacy in the use of your own phone? Okay, do you have a policy about your performance management system, about what you expect, about what your rights are as managers? And are you being consistent with those policies? Are you communicating those policies? Also, understanding the interplay between performance and other things like protected leave, disability. There's a really, really delicate interplay there. And you want to throw in workers' comp, and you're in the Bermuda Triangle. FMLA, ADA, workers' comp, ships lost in the night. So checking your blind spots, again, taking stock of the entire situation. And also part of another blind spot goes to the point right above it, consistency. Okay, what I'd love for somebody to be able to do is before you either discipline somebody based on a performance-related issue or even more so terminate them, check and see what have we done in the past 6 months and are we being consistent? I'm not saying you have to be married to the precedent that you've set, but you have set a precedent. And when you deviate from that, remember, I keep saying inconsistencies give rise to liabilities. The brain starts spinning. Why am I being treated differently? And if you are going to try to move away from whatever precedent that you've set, be thoughtful about how you're doing it. Okay, that trigger change gets people really freaking out. I'm not saying, again, that you always have to say yes to what you said before, be forgiving, but be thoughtful about how we are going to work through that change. And most importantly, of anything you can do, of all the stuff we said, stay calm, carry on, calmer heads shall prevail. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry we went over. Feel free to stay for questions. You've been great. We'll be here all night. Try the veal, tip your waitress.
If you're interested in learning more about performance evaluation and setting up an actual system, my book's available on Amazon.com. Thank you.
Great. Well, Marcia and Megan, thank you both very much. It was very informative, very helpful. Feel free to stay at the end if you have any questions. We'll do those afterward, but we're going to end the program now since it's a little after 2. So thank you for coming today.